Hey guys, Greg Alexander. Today I want to give you my perspective on swim baits and everything about swim baits. All the different ways you can rig swim baits, what times of year you should fish them, how deep you should fish them. Are they any good in dirty water? Are they any good? Are they better in clear water? So let's get right into it. A swim bait, most everybody knows in the bass fishing world or even the fishing world today what a swim bait is. A swim bait, for the most part today, is some type of soft body or even hard body swimmer. But most of the hard body swimmers today, they kind of more fall into the range of glide baits than they do swim baits anymore. But they are still a swim bait. So swim baits come in pretty much every size under the sun. You can get the little tiny 2.5 inch swim baits, which I don't have one here with me, or the standard size swim bait that most people are going to throw are going to be somewhere between 4 and 5 inches when you're throwing them by themselves. This is a 4-inch Berkeley power swimmer. And the way most people would rig a swim bait would be with what they call a belly weighted hook. Different weights, 1/8, 3/16, quarter, even a 1/16, depending on how deep you want to get it. And again, the weight is going to depend not only just on the depth, but the bulk of the lure that you're throwing. If you're throwing this lure versus this lure, and you want to get them to the same depth, obviously you need to add a little bit more weight to this one to get it down. This particular weight right here is a 1/8 inch. This is a screw lock hook. So it just screws in. It just screws in, if you can see that or not, that little screw on the end. It just screws into the head of the swim bait. So you just screw it in there all the way in to the eye. Make sure it's turned in the right direction, right? Belly facing the hook. And then you would just text rig it or text pose rig it straight through, out the back, and up on top. And what I like to do is I just like to push it back just a hair, just so that point catches in there, unless you're not around anything that's snaggy at all. And then the best way to fish a swim bait is to cast it out towards your target, whatever your target may be, a point, a rock pile, a brush pile, a ledge, a bluff wall, whatever it is that you're fishing where you've determined that the fish are located. Throw it out, let it sink, to its desired depth, depending on the clarity of the water, depending on the depth that you're fishing, and just reel it slowly. You may give it a little jerk or a little pause now and again. If that doesn't seem to trigger a strike, then just reel it in continually. So this is a 4-inch model. Then you have bigger ones. So when would you throw the 4-inch model? Well, most of the time, if you're just, interested in catching the most fish, it's going to catch you more fish than this one's going to catch you. It's going to catch you more fish than this one's going to catch you. So if you're focused on more fish, 4 inches or even, smaller, 3 inches or even 2 3/4, some of these, you'll get a lot more bites if you're just out there fishing for fun. So if you're fishing for bigger fish, obviously, or the time of year dictates bigger bait because you're seeing a lot of big bait, you're not seeing a bunch of this little smaller 1.5, 2-inch bait. You're seeing 3 to 4 inch bait or bigger. Then a lot of times the bass will target, the biggest fish in the school of the bait fish. So then you're going to want to go with something a little bigger like this 5-inch model, right? And these are paddle tail swim baits, right? Paddle tail, they just paddle back and forth, back and forth. When swim baits first came out, they started a lot of the swim baits, and I don't have one here with me, but a lot of the swim baits actually started with a swimming tail, kind of just like on the back of a swimming worm it would be. And those kind of faded away in favor of this boot tail, the swimming boot tail. And I would, you know, there's times when I still like to throw the swimming tail, but there's not a lot of available baits with the swimming tail on it. Now, what has come out in the last couple of years is, well, I'll show you the package first. This is the Deal by Berkley, and it actually has more of a squiggly type swimming tail to it. You know, it's top and bottom, but it has more of a swimming tail. So it's a different type of action. This one more, when it's coming through the water, it's going side to side, kind of like that. And this one is just like more straight swimming. Now, if you watch bait fish in the water, it's very rare with a shad or a regular bait fish that you see any side to side motion at all. The only time you really ever see kind of like a side to side motion like you get with that is a fish that's struggling and, you know, kind of more towards the surface, and he's not in real good shape. He's swimming around kind of slow. And of course, that's what bass will target too. But for bass that are just targeting schools of bait, you don't need all that side to side. A little squiggly tail will work you just fine. Now, with all swim baits, depending on the size, can be used as trailers. Trailers on jigs, trailers on vibrating jigs or chatterbaits, trailers on spinnerbaits. And I've used every size under the sun on the back, but you know, you don't want to overwhelm your spinnerbait, your chatterbait, your swim jig with, you know, necessarily a giant swim bait on the back. So you want something to complement it and give it a little bit of extra action without detracting from the whole profile of the lure. Then it kind of looks funny then, right? Then it kind of looks out of place almost. So you want it to look natural. So swimming tail, boot tail, what are some of the other ways to rig these swim baits? Well, let's look at another swim bait. This is an old Osprey swim bait, has the eye on it, and it's a line through swim bait. So it doesn't really have, you know, a place to even rig a belly weighted hook. It actually has like a little, I don't know if you can see it, a little metal shaft through there. You slide your line through, and then you tie a treble hook to it. And then you would stick the treble hook basically back up in the belly like that. So that's an Osprey. This is pre-weighted also. It's interior weighted with this little metal deal. So these are okay for, like, you know, around rocks or open areas or sandbars or sandy points, but you get around stumps or snags, that's not going to be your best deal. But you can take any belly weighted swim bait and you can add a treble hook if you're getting short strikes. You can add it two ways. You could add it to the top of the hook here, like so, if you're around more snag, and then stick it back in the back like that, right? That's more snag resistant. But if you put it on the top, then you need to put a little keeper over the hook. You know, just a little hook keeper. I use pieces of cut off screen bead. You can use any old type of pre-manufactured hook keeper on the market, because they'll get that hook, and then of course they'll throw it off and you'll lose the fish. But if you're not around a snaggy area, then you can add the treble hook, take the hook part and face it the same way as this hook, and slide it on your hook like so, re-rig it, and then stick the hook in the belly here, right? And that gives you a little extra stinger. And then you can also, which I'm not going to go through the whole thing today of how to do it exactly, but you can also take a piece of braided line, tie it to either your hook eye or the back of the hook to this, maybe a 2-inch piece on this particular one, and then hook the hook back in here to a piece of braided line. And that gets for, you know, like extremely short striking fish that are just biting at the tail of your swim bait, that gives them something to bite onto that you can catch them, you know. And most of the time, I'm not going to probably, in practice anyhow, for a tournament, I'm not going to start out with that hook tied way to the back, because I don't necessarily want it interfering with the action of the tail. And it will a little bit because it adds weight to it, maybe makes it drop or drag or slow down. And so that's not the first thing that I'm going to do. Another way that you can rig these swim baits is with an underspin. You know, you're in a little bit dingier water. You need a little bit of extra flash. It's windy out. The flash is going to help you. You can add this underspin to pretty much any swim bait. And one thing that's cool about underspins or even jig heads, which we'll talk about in a minute, is a lot of these jig heads and underspins don't have an eye on it. But I really like the ones that have an eye on them. That eye on the head, the jig head, adds a whole extra set of eyes, and it gives the fish the illusion that they can get a 2-for-1 meal. So now instead of just one eye on one side, they see two eyes and they think there's two fish swimming together. And then the extra flash underneath, they maybe think maybe there's a small school. So then they'll go for that. They're like, wow, I can get a three for a meal, you know, kind of like the Alabama rig. Speaking of the Alabama rig, not really trying to cover the Alabama rig today, but one good thing that one good thing about the Alabama rig is it tends to be a really good bait when the fish are suspended in the wintertime. And you can put, your smaller swim baits on there like you normally would. But I'm not going to get into the Alabama rig today necessarily. So other types of swim baits that you can consider are the Megabass Spark Shad. And what makes this one different, it just got a really, let's pull one out here so you can see. It really has a lifelike shape and a lifelike eye and a lifelike action. You can see the real good eye on there. It has the fins. It has really good color. Has a very thin, see how that just hangs over? It's a very thin back. Well, what that does with this Spark Shad is this Spark Shad has a real kind of like a more lifelike tight wiggle than some of these bigger boot tails that have more of a swinging back and forth look. So it's a much more lifelike deal. So in gin clear water, you're going to want to really get every little detail right with these. Now you may have to adjust the color somewhat. This is just a regular Tennessee shad color, but you may have to adjust the color a little bit to get it right in the watercolor that you're fishing in. And this is a 4-inch model Megabass Spark Shad. So then you can go to, I showed it a second ago, but this is a mag draft. This is a 6-inch mag draft. They make an 8-inch mag draft, and they make one a little bit smaller. This particular bait right here is a bait that's favored by like Chris Zaldane and Brandon Polinick. And of course, Zaldane will kind of glue it in his hand, and being a big gambler, he's gambling on a big bag, and he'll get a big bag, one day, and it usually keeps him in contention. But like Polinick, I know when he won the James River Open a couple years ago, he picked a big mag draft up after he had his limit and ended up catching his biggest fish the final day for sure. At least that's what he told me. And that's what it's for. So are you going to get a ton of bites on that? You're not going to get a ton of bites on that. But, sometimes it's our mind that stops us from throwing stuff like this, because we don't get, we don't get the 10, 12 bites that we get with the other swim bait. And we throw it for a half hour and we don't get bit, so then it goes back in the tackle box and we don't ever pull it out again. So if you want to win tournaments, if you want to do better, if you want to catch bigger fish, you got to do things that everybody else is not doing. And it's hard to go 3 hours, 4 hours throwing this and not get a bite, you think, well, they're just not going to bite it. And then boom, they load up on it and you catch the biggest fish of the day, the week, the month, or possibly even the year because you threw that. So what are some kind of off the wall ways to rig a swim bait? Well, you can throw a swim bait on the Tokyo rig. When would you throw a swim bait on a Tokyo rig? Well, the purpose of that Tokyo rig would be to get that bait to the bottom. So depending on the depth again, and you have to, you know, how much wind, how much current, how deep you're fishing, would depend on how much weight you put on the bottom of this Tokyo rig. So after cold fronts, and a lot of times in the winter, the shad will basically go right straight to the bottom. And instead of being in those big balls that they're in that you see, you know, like on your depth finder or your side imaging when you're fishing, you see these big balls of bait kind of swimming around. They tend to spread out thin and get down on the bottom and move across the bottom. So when this is happening, and you can know for sure this is happening, you know, if you have live imaging, you can see them. Sometimes a regular 2D sonar, you can't tell those fish are on the bottom. They just kind of blend in with the bottom and you can't really tell that they're even there. But I noticed with the live imaging, you can actually see these shad just swimming across the bottom, you know, staying within 3 or 4 inches of the bottom, the whole school of them. And so when that's happening, that's when you take something like this Tokyo rig your swim bait up like you would, you know, throw it out, let it go right straight to the bottom, and just reel it slowly, very, very slowly, feeling it bumping across the bottom to put it where the bait is so that the bass would recognize it as bait, because they're looking down, see, now, because the bass are, the bait's not up, they're not looking up, they're not chasing bait, they're looking down because the bait's down. So that's when you'd want to put your bait down on the bottom. Another way to do that is with a wobble head, which I don't know what I've done with my wobble head. Y'all know what a wobble head is. It's like a football head with a swinging hook. That's another thing that you could do when these bass or when these bait fish go to the bottom. Put the wobble head on. It's going to keep your bait kind of like up like this, working across the bottom, and the bass will basically stop it and T-bone it. So how do you know how deep to fish with a swim bait? Some of you guys watching this video, you know, you're bank fishermen, you don't have a depth finder, you don't know, you know, how deep the fish are, so you just got to kind of play around. Oh, here's my wobble head. I stuck it up here on the top. Wobble head, see? This swings back and forth. Just a Texas rig hook. Put the swim bait on there and just reel it across the bottom slowly. Oh. So some of you guys are, you know, like I said, bank fishermen. So then it's just a matter of experimentation. You have to experiment. Do I need to let this thing go to the bottom before I start reeling it in? Am I getting bit like that? Do I reel it slowly through the water column? Do I reel it on top? A lot of that depends on seasonal patterns and time of year, right? You know, the colder it gets, the more the bass tend to go to the bottom. The warmer it gets, the more the bass tend to come up into the bank. And somewhere in between, they'll sometimes suspend. And the bait fish do the same thing. So you just have to experiment with that. Another head here, let's talk about another swim bait head. A real popular swim bait head, especially in the South, is the J-Will swim bait head. It's just an open hook swim bait head. What makes it so good? Nothing really. It just has a really big, sharp hook on it. Sticks out a lot. You're not going to be able to fish this head around snags. You know, this is an open water type head. So how about if you're like on, say, Lake Hartwell or some of these other lakes that have a lot of these cane piles or brush piles that the fish hang around? You can't really reel a swim bait, you know, right down and through that brush pile with an open head now, can you? Because it's just going to get hung up. So then you would take something like this, which has the weed guard on it, which would allow you to get through that brush pile. Or something that I like to do when I'm around snaggy stuff is I just like to throw a regular old flipping jig or swim jig head, right? Got the brush guard on it. It's got the hook tie right up on the nose. Comes through cover real well. And not just for deep brush, like on Hartwell, different places like that, but if you're fishing a swim bait down the bank around a lot of deadfall, blow down trees, things where you could, you know, you would normally like flip or pitch a jig or a creature bait or worm, then you can actually slow swim this bait through the branches, let it sink up and down, jig it, pop it. When those fish are in a little bit more of a chasing mood, and you can get that swim bait right in their house. So that's something I like to do also with that deal. And let's talk about one more type of swim bait. And this is, you know, mostly used for trailers anymore, but you can use it just as a straight swim bait too. This is like the Zako, right? This is the Yamamoto Zako. And, you know, Z-Man makes their version of it. And a lot of people have these swim baits basically that are, they use most of these trailers on swim jigs or drawing a blank here, vibrating jigs, swim jigs, and spinner baits. So, but you can also throw this like you would throw any other swim bait with a belly weighted hook, a jig headed hook, or any of the other ways that I talked about. And it's not something that seems like a lot of people are doing, is throwing this particular style of swim bait like that. So if you fish in more pressured areas, it's good to give these fish something a little bit different to look at. So that's something that I like to do too. Colors, man, with swim baits, you're pretty much trying to copy three things. You're trying to copy a shad, a herring, or some type of perch bluegill. So those are the colors that you're going to want to concentrate on. That's why you see so many colors in shad color, because that's what's swimming around out there. Now, if you're in California and some other places, you know, they've got trout in their lakes. If you're in some of these swampy areas, you know, you have some kind of different baby carp and bitterhead and things like that these fish will key onto, and kind of like gold colors that can also work. And then I'm going to talk about one more swim bait here. When you want realism and size, then you can go with something like, well, here's it's an older one, but it's a Rego Baits SKT swimmer. Now, Skeet Reese won, I don't know, a tournament on Gunnersville, a tournament on Smith Mountain Lake, where he blew the doors off of pretty much everybody throwing this Rego swim bait, right? That's a 6-inch version. It's got all the fins, the scales, the eyes, even the open mouth. It's got a line through. There's a little hole right here in the top of his head, a little line through, which you can put a treble hook on the back of it, or even two with a piece of braid. And this particular swim bait is also pre-weighted, so it gets down pretty quick, and it doesn't have a lot of action again. It just, that tail, when you're swimming that thing, that tail is just very tight. But that tight action is the most realistic action. that wider wobble, you know, for dingier water, you may need that to attract a fish from a little bit away. But when you get in clearer water, then you're going to want to have a more realistic action swim bait, something like this, or something like the deal, or something like this osprey, little osprey bait, which they come in all different sizes also. And let me put that one back in a box there. So, you know, there's another technique that I don't see a lot of people using. You know, when swim baits kind of first came out, you know, about 15 years ago or so, I'm kind of hesitant to change, you know, but I bought a couple of them and I threw them and I caught some fish on them, and I actually caught some giant fish on them. And what I did back in the beginning that a lot of people I don't think were doing is I would take these bigger 5 and 6 inch swim baits and put them on like a 7/0 hook with maybe an 1/8 ounce at the most weight on them. And I would launch these things up in the lily pads and just reel them to those lily pads, kind of pretty much on top almost. And I caught at least 2 really, really big fish doing that, and a lot of other fish doing that. So that's a technique that you may want to add to your arsenal instead of just everybody's thinking about swim bait, slow roll them in open water, out around brush piles, drop off, bluff ends, things like that. But, you know, sometimes you got to go in after the fish with these swim baits. And so what size hook do you use with a swim bait? Well, it depends on the swim bait, right? This particular swim bait, this mag draft, that's about a 5/0 hook in there. That hook is on the small side. I put that in there for illustration purposes. Generally with that mag draft, see, and you got enough, when he bites down on it, you got enough there for him to get him. But you probably almost be better off with these great big swim baits with like a 7/0 hook even, and even make like a deep throated 7/0 hook for that. But you know, a 3/0 probably is big enough for that particular bait there. That's about a 3 in there right now, because there's not a lot of body there. See how thin it is? Not a lot of body there. He's going to get that hook. This one has a lot more body, so it's going to be harder for him to get that hook. So, you know, don't undersize your hook too much. You're better off to have a little bit of an oversized hook than an undersized hook in a swim bait, because there is so much there. And you know, and there's going to be times, no matter what hook you put in there, that fish is coming up from underneath of it and his lip hits that and folds the thing over, and you're just not going to catch him. So that's going to happen sometimes, no matter what you do. But you definitely want to make sure that your hook is big enough for the size swim bait that you're throwing. 7/0 for these bigger ones, 5/0 for the 4 and 5 inch. You know, 5 inch, probably 5/0 for that, and 4/0 or 3/0 for these smaller 3.5 swim baits. Maybe even a 2/0 for, you know, some of the smaller type baits that you'd put like on an Alabama rig, like the 2.5 inch baits, or the deal type swim baits. So keep that in mind also. You know, you can add flavorings, you can add chartreuse to the tail if you're around a lot of bluegill or yellow perch. You can add a little bit more shine and glitter to them if you're, you know, around shad or white perch, even if the bass are eating white perch, if you're fishing in a river system. And you want to experiment with all the sizes, the speed of retrieve, the actions, and figure out what works best for you on your particular lake. So my 2 personal favorite swim baits would be the Rage Swimmer in various colors, from IU to, this is Green Pumpkin Pearl, and the Kitech, both in about, this is a 3 3/4 inch, you know, 3 3/4 to 4 inch is going to be, you know, kind of like the most overall best size. Now I do like the Kitech, like the 3.3 inch for like vibrating jig trailers or spinnerbait trailers most of the time. But I have used this particular Rage swimmer. It's a 3.75 inch, which it's basically 4 inches, as a spinnerbait trailer, and it seems to really attract a lot of bigger fish. So, but you know, all these swim baits work. All of them on certain days are going to work. The one that's your favorite's not going to work all the time. You know, so you got to mix it up. Like always, each day has its own personality as far as what the fish are going to want to eat. So I hope this kind of helped you get an idea of how to rig your swim baits, which ones to use, how deep to fish them, what sizes you should throw, and all these things that we talked about today. And again, if you like my content and you want to follow me on a regular basis, I'd ask you please hit the subscribe button, the little like button, and share these videos with your friends. It'll help you be a better fisherman. Again, I thank you for watching, and have a blessed day.